My name is Colin Nolden. I'm based at the University of Bristol in the Law School and University of Oxford in the Environmental Change Institute. And today I'm going to talk about locating value in sector coupling, powering railways with renewable energy. This is derived from a research project completed last year, which connected solar PV systems into the UK's DC electrified rail system. And this is a world's first. It's the first time ever that railway traction was provided directly from renewable power anywhere in the world. So I'll just, first of all, tell you about the two main protagonists here. So first of all, we have Riding Sunbeams, which was the innovator. Riding Sunbeams is a company which was founded by two social enterprises, so it has strong societal value ambitions. It is the recipient of R&D funding from the Department for Transport and Innovate UK to demonstrate the possibility of powering trains with solar power. It is co-owned by non-profit entities We Are Possible, which is a climate change advocacy, and Community Energy South, which is a regional community energy hub. And I'm one of the non-executive directors of Community Energy South. And Riding Sunbeams seeks commuter and community co-ownership of railway direct wire electricity supply assets. So solar farms that can power trains directly without having to go through the railway's shadow grid. Network Rail, in contrast, is regulated public enterprise controlling system critical railway infrastructure. Collaboration with low carbon innovators is encouraged through R&D funding provided by the UK's Department for Transport. Network Rail as an infrastructure provider focuses on safety and continuity and seeks to minimize institutional risk-taking where possible. At the same time, it is increasingly subject to environmental and social regulation, and I'll get back to that later. So as you can see in this slide, also in the middle, I have a picture of the final report to the Minister for Rail. This is also one of the drivers for change in the railway sector. So my methodology. I was an embedded researcher within Riding Sunbeam's First Light project, throughout its small business research initiative, first of a kind round 2 funding, which was provided by the Department for Transport. And I was looking at social value and developing a social value framework. This involved 8 workshops, roundtables, focus groups, and meetings, 3 of which I recorded, involving community energy representatives, Riding Sunbeams representatives, Network Rail representatives, legal experts, business model experts, technical experts, and social and environmental impact experts. And the theoretical framework that I use for this particular paper and the angle that I'm taking is based on public procurement of innovation and business model frameworks. So first of all, public procurement of innovation targets entrepreneurship and specific outcomes as opposed to specifications of relevant goods and services. So it allows differentiation according to direct and catalytic public procurement of innovation, as well as adaptive and developmental, as well as simplification and cooperation. This will become evident in the next slide. I'm also looking at business model frameworks because this particular case study shows that public procurement of innovation depends on business model alignment to actually move from pre-commercial public procurement to proper commercial public procurement. And business model frameworks facilitate the evaluation and identification of convergence potential. So they allow differentiation according to value proposition, supply chain, customer interface, financial model, and business model governance. This is derived from the business model canvas, the famous one from Osterwalder and Pinguer. So the actual research found out that funding for Riding Sunbeam's research and development project can be conceptualized as an example of catalytic development pre-commercial public procurement innovation. This is because it focused on outcomes rather than technological inputs. So the aim was to green the UK's electricity, railway system. So to reduce carbon emissions there was the 4 C's. It was to reduce cost, to reduce carbon emissions, to increase capacity, and to increase customer satisfaction. So there was no technological input specified. At the same time, it served to catalyze radical technical innovation for the end user of the technology, which is Network Rail, but not the end user of electricity, which are the railway franchises in the UK's split business model rail system. This first of a kind funding, this R&D funding, facilitated business model innovation and alignment to lower risk and transaction costs of commercial direct adaptive public procurement of innovation from non-traditional suppliers. So this R&D support is pre-commercial public procurement of innovation and it facilitates direct adaptive public procurement of innovation. Now, at the same time, we have to understand that the business models, as I mentioned before, of Network Rail and Riding Sunbeams are very different. So Network Rail, its value proposition is about critical system providing safe and reliable mobility services. It increasingly needs to take decarbonisation targets and social aspects into account. In contrast, Riding Sunbeams seeks to power trains with direct via renewable energy supply, and it aims for community and commuter co-ownership of supply assets. The supply chain of Network Rail is based on a very complex web of contractual arrangements with railway supply companies, ranging from Cyprus to energy, whereas Riding Sunbeams has a very simple supply chain in contrast. It's engagement in renewable energy deployment to the point of investment readiness. The customer interface of Network Rail is opaque. It interfaces with passenger train operating companies and freight services and the public directly through 20 managed stations. So all London train stations are managed by Network Rail, but those outside of London are not. It engages constantly in maintenance, interruption, and safety. So it seeks to avoid interruptions at the same time. It is often unavoidable. Riding Sunbeams, in contrast, has a potential interface with Network Rail through direct via electricity supply power purchase agreements, and the public directly through share offers, investment, and community benefit funds. The financial model of Network Rail is charging passenger train operating companies and freight services. At the same time, this is under review because of COVID-19 crisis, but it also receives massive funding from government through direct grants and borrowing. And at some point, I think UK government debt was shifted onto the balance sheet of Network Rail to make it look more favourable, which I think is also something that was done by the French government at some point when they had to drop their budget deficit below the 3% mark. They shifted their debt onto SNCF. So the same thing has been done in the UK, but now they have a hard debt ceiling of 30 billion. Riding Sunbeams, in contract, aims to supply electricity through PPAs, which covers the cost of installation plus the return on investment to attract investors, and aims to facilitate community and commuter co-ownership and provide a community benefit fund. Business model governance of Network Rail, well, it was renationalized, if you like, in 2014. It was originally composed of over 100 public and industry organizations reflecting stakeholder interests in rail. But now it is a wholly public enterprise, which is quite unusual in that it is regulated. It is regulated, a wholly public enterprise, but regulated by the Office of Road and Rail through periodic reviews determining delivery targets and funding. In contrast, Riding Sunbeams is a limited company, majority owned by 2 non-profit organizations, quite unusual, and it's governed by a board of directors and aim to shift from grant dependency towards sustainable income streams, which is through power purchase agreements with Network Rail. I'm going to move on to my final slide. So, how to actually facilitate convergence here. Facilitating sector convergence between these innovative grid-edge direct wire renewable energy suppliers such as Riding Sunbeams and huge energy procurers such as Network Rail requires agreements on procurable societal value in support of targets and ambitions. And this is increasingly facilitated through regulations. So in the UK, an act was passed in 2012, which is the Public Services in brackets Social Values Act, which encourages all public sector organisations to procure from a wider range of suppliers including those with non-traditional business models. And there's increasing emphasis on the social value that these organizations can deliver. Now, of course, it's difficult to quantify and value such social value, yet there is an ongoing drive among various organizations in the UK to actually capture this value and monetize it if possible. There also needs to be agreement on how such value can be procured. So it's not only a question of how we can actually monetize the value, but how we can procure such value through direct adaptive public procurement of innovation. Interestingly, Riding Sunbeams just last week, Thursday, received another round of Innovate UK first of a kind funding, this time to test or to demonstrate a connection to the AC gantries. So these more conventional electrified railway systems, unlike the UK's third railway system. So we have another round of catalytic development PPI put in place, but Network Rail is still a bit reluctant to move on to the next step towards direct adaptive public procurement of innovation. That's because of their very conservative view on risk taking and the transaction costs that are low with all their embedded suppliers compared to non-traditional businesses. So cooperation through business model alignment provides an opportunity to lower risk and transaction costs. But this depends on more mission-oriented governance. And this mission orientation needs to stretch along the entire innovation and diffusion change through institutional supervision to create a route to market. Mission orientation through the supply chain is necessary to facilitate this innovation, but in the UK we aren't quite there yet, but hopefully regulation can be put in, or there is an emerging drive to recognize that markets themselves cannot provide this kind of mission orientation necessary to deliver net zero targets. So hopefully regulation will be put in place soon. Thank you very much for paying attention.
Okay, thank you, Colin. So Niccolò.
Thank you, Colin, for your working paper that I had the pleasure to read. I will quickly go through the positive, let's say the less positive aspects, and then a list of minor detailed comments. First of all, I would say that the paper is timely. Also, the title, I mean, it's timely because sector coupling or smart sector integration is nowadays a trendy topic in European policy making. There is a clear understanding that decarbonization must go beyond the electricity sector, should address directly other energy consuming or energy intensive sectors like transportation and like railways, as you correctly point out. And at the same time, it's correct to highlight that there is a double opportunity. Decarbonization, or the investments related to decarbonization, can at the same time facilitate a modernization of the infrastructure that we inherited from the past. And then it's interesting, I would say, the perspective that you provide through your contribution, because it's, I would say, a perspective that goes back to institutional economics, or to something like looking at how entities working in a sector are organized, are structured, the importance of issues like path dependency, and the importance to break it in order to foster new business models and new way to arrange the economic activity under consideration. And you highlight the importance of this mission orientation and institutional supervisions by public authorities. About the methodology, as you said, it's basically, you refer to the concept of business models, so the BMF, the business model framework, and the idea of public procurement for innovation. So the idea that procuring a good or a service by the public can foster innovation, innovative business solutions. And then you refer also to a specific case study, the one of Riding Sunbeams. It's interesting also the conclusions, the policy-oriented conclusions of your contribution. I understood that basically there is a need to coordinate the governance of a sector and the specific economic regulation of that sector. The idea that you must be holistic, have an holistic approach. And public procurement is important to speed up change in the sector. And by doing this, by having an holistic approach, going beyond, let's say, traditional narrow economic regulation, you can provide several societal benefits. So far, so good. More on the limit, the negative or the limitations of the contribution. It's trivial, but maybe introduction, it's nice to go directly to the point. The introduction for me is a bit long and full of details on the railway sector in Britain, in the UK, but that maybe are not strictly necessary to put all of them in the introduction. On the contrary, the research question is not so clearly stated. It's not so apparent from the reading. You have to wait the second page to try to understand. And also some words, some expression that you mentioned here in the introduction, but also later in the paper, are not, let's say, explicitly defined. And this could be a challenge for, let's say, reader less experienced, less familiar with this sector, with this topic. So value-led business, I have an idea, but not sure there is a clear definition, or mission orientation at the beginning is not well defined. Grid edge innovation could be not clear for someone unfamiliar with the electricity developments. And even sector coupling is, there is a definition on page 7, but it's not totally clear. Then this is probably even more important, the case study. I would have loved to know more about riding sunbeams and this project, especially from the electricity point of view. There is the table 1 when you compare the two actors, but you do not really describe this project by riding sunbeam. And this is, for me, is a major limit, because then you do not understand well the implication. And related, the consideration from the electricity system point of view are a bit superficial. You do not really prove that there is value added in what riding sunbeam does. The link between network rail essential service and its aversion to procure with this company, with this innovative actor is a bit unclear. Again, sector coupling is mentioned, but I do not really understand the importance of it. Maybe you can even consider to change the title. Again, some links with the theoretical framework are not so clear. You have them in the paper, but they are not well described. So you describe well transaction costs, business models, but coordination versus simplification or replacement of institutional supervision with regulation through contracts is not super clear. You should probably go beyond business models as the main analytical framework. Maybe the issue of European policy, you mention it a lot, but after Brexit maybe becomes less relevant. And finally, you find here, and I can share with you some detailed things that maybe you can improve in your paper. And with this, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Niccolo. Colin, for the sake of time, I will not go into my slides. And actually, I understood better after your presentation than after reading the text. And I'll send you my slides. But basically, you know, I said, and it's still valid, I said the topic is really good. It is timely. It is an issue of convergence. So, you know, we're right in the electrification of trains and sector coupling. So that's all fine. But my comments were, after reading the paper, were basically I got stuck. You know, what is your research question? What question are you trying to, and what problem are you trying to solve, and what you're, and I think I became a little bit clearer after your presentation. I think what this is all about, but it's not really, in my view, what you are trying to do is an evaluation. You know, it's an evaluation of something, but then I think there are two options here. either you evaluate that project, you know, a riding sunbeam project in which you were involved and everything, and I come back to the methodology, or you evaluate a policy instrument, you know, this public procurement of innovation, public policy instrument, PPP, whatever kind of thing, which is an interesting instrument. And your paper could be, you know, the evaluation either of the project or of the instrument, or maybe you can link it somehow, you know, and write that up as an evaluation study. Of course, you have all this literature, and I think it's relevant. But my main comment, which I really understood only now, and I don't think you wrote it in the paper, is your involvement in writing sunbeams. You know, so I think I had some questions about the methodology, which but I think it's some sort of action research, you know, because you have been involved yourself in this. I mean, this is totally valid, but you have to somehow conceptualize the action research part when doing that kind of evaluation. And I think that is missing. But I would really encourage you to, I don't know, to frame it as maybe rather personally, maybe rather as an evaluation study with you having inside knowledge, then as, I mean, you can still turn it into a scientific paper, but as an evaluation study. That would be my main comment. I'll send you my slides. So there was one question I'll add. Gunther had a question. I'll add it just here. What are the potentials to use the renewable energy also for other transport services? So Colin, you get to answer. We have 7 more minutes, so it's fine.
I touch upon that only really in my conclusion. So there has been interest, for example, from motorway service stations, so that a business model like this has potential to be rolled out for direct wire supply of EV charging points at motorway service stations, for example. This is a possibility, but there has to be some kind of contractual certainty to enable the investment into solar farms to pay off. So somehow the contractual certainty has to be, would in that case then say have to be provided by the organization that runs and maintains motorway service stations, and they will have to charge people who charge their electric vehicles from the EV charging points accordingly. And I think at the moment there currently isn't enough certainty to know what the demand structure of electricity for electric vehicles at such motorway service stations is, to allow motorway service station owners, say, to engage in a 7 to 10 year power purchase agreement contract at the moment. I hope that answers your question.
And the comments to Nicolo's and my comments?
Yes, so well, first of all, I would like to thank you very, very much. And this is very, very helpful because, yeah, I recognize that my paper is probably quite dense at the beginning, and I try to focus, or well, I try to cram in too much information at the beginning, which is probably not necessary. Too much detail on some aspects, whereas I've obviously omitted some quite key concepts. So I see that I need to reduce the amount of detail which is not necessary to strengthen the argument, and instead focus on the points. I think Nicola made very good points. I need to mention value-led businesses, mission orientation, grid edge innovation, and so on. That I might need to go beyond business models as well as something I have to take into account. I have, now to your comments, Matthias, I originally had one paper, and then I split it into two. And one of my papers is kind of about governance, and this one I have, yeah, I wasn't really quite sure where this was going. I think that's why it's also lacking a research question. I wasn't quite sure how personal I could be about this. So I've just mentioned that that I was an embedded researcher. didn't really go into detail what this actually.
Now I understand. Now I understand this adjective because for
Yes.
embedded is a bit. Is another word that I wanted to put in the list.
Yeah. So like the only hint that I was properly involved in this was when I say I was an embedded researcher. Then I just left it at that. And I think you're right in that, of course, my involvement in developing the social value framework, which we're now using as a negotiation point between Network Rail and Riding Sunbeams, I could bring forward because this is something that could determine the procurability of this innovation, is whether the social value inherent in community and commuter co-ownership of railway supply assets is something that Network Rail values. So that's certainly something that I could quite easily tease out and expand on. Then again, the policy instrument of PPI, that's probably something which might fit better into a governance paper, which I'm writing alongside. I think that could be separated out and could be more tied into a more coherent narrative about policy and governance. And then this paper could be an evaluation of my action research, my embedded research component. And then I think it would be, I think it would make an easier read as well, because then I could put, I could take out some of the detail in here on UK railways and so on, which probably would fit in better into a governance paper. So thank you very much for your very helpful comments. I've